looks so stupid standing there. Look at her, still standing there. Doesn't she know nobody wants her here? Go back where you came from.
The laughter echoed down the hall like a cruel, sharp blade. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it cut through Tamara's soul just the same. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, her heart thundering as she stood by her locker, staring at the ground. In her peripheral vision, she saw a group of white students pointing at her, snickering, whispering. They didn't even try to hide it. "Look at her hair," one of them said, the words a venomous hiss. "How does it even grow like that?" Another voice, a low, mocking tone. "Bet she smells like fried chicken." The hallway around her felt like it was closing in. Every glance, every smirk, every side eye from her classmates was an accusation. She knew exactly what they were thinking. "You don't belong here." The whispers grew louder, and with each passing second, the sting of their words burned deeper. But Tamara didn't move, didn't react. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Then, out of nowhere, she heard the one sentence that shattered the silence, a cutting remark that pierced her heart like a dagger. "Who do you think you are, trying to fit in with people like us?" The world seemed to freeze. For a moment, it was just her and the silence of her thoughts. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the tension broke. Tamara raised her head, her eyes sharp, the fire in them igniting like a fuse ready to blow. With a slow, deliberate step forward, she faced her tormentors, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want to see who I am? Watch." The bell rang, cutting through the dull hum of Jefferson High like a knife through silence. Tamara Harris gathered her books, shifting her weight from one foot to the other as she stood near her locker. The hallways were already crowded with students, most of them chatting, laughing, and heading off to their next class. She adjusted her bag strap and turned the combination lock, trying to tune out the noise around her. Her fingers hesitated on the lock. Click, click, click. The rhythm felt off, but she didn't pause. She never paused. She knew the routine. She had to get through this. Just get through the day. But then she heard it. A low, mocking giggle. Tamara froze, her heart skipping a beat. It came from behind her, just out of sight. She gripped the edge of her locker door a little harder, trying to steady her breath. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. She could ignore it. She had to ignore it. The giggle was followed by a voice. "Did you see her hair? Like, who does that? Does she even brush it?" A second voice chimed in louder, more condescending. "She's probably just trying to look like one of us. Sad really. Doesn't even belong here." Tamara's grip tightened. The words sliced through her like glass, sharper than any she'd heard before. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to focus. She had to keep going. She wasn't going to give them what they wanted. She wasn't going to break. But then it came, an unmistakable sneer from someone in her peripheral vision. A tall, blonde girl in a designer jacket stood by with two of her friends, watching Tamara with cold, calculating eyes. "Bet she smells like fried chicken or something," the girl said, the words dripping with venom. So stereotypical. Tamara flinched, her stomach turning. The words felt like they hit her skin, stinging, burning. She took a deep breath and looked down, trying to ignore them, trying to disappear into the hall's crowd. But it wasn't enough. They weren't done. The third voice came from behind her, a male voice, mocking and low. "Who do you think you are, trying to fit in with people like us?" Tamara's chest tightened. She wanted to turn around, to scream at them, to throw something, to fight back. But instead, she stood frozen, rooted to the spot as if the ground itself had swallowed her whole. Her thoughts swirled around her. This is what it feels like to not belong. This is what it feels like to be invisible and yet painfully, relentlessly seen. This is who I am here. Target. But the worst part was not the words. It wasn't even the sting of the insults. It was the overwhelming truth that, in this moment, she had no power. None at all. The laughter rang in her ears as she stood there, the sound too loud, too invasive. Her vision blurred for a moment. She wasn't sure if it was from the heat rising in her chest or the ache in her eyes, but something inside her snapped. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep pretending that this didn't hurt. What's the point of surviving if you never fight back? Tamara took a step forward, her heart pounding in her throat. The world around her seemed to slow as she turned slowly, deliberately, to face the trio of students still standing there. The laughter died as they saw the shift in her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words rang out like thunder. You want to see who I am? Watch. And in that moment, for the first time, Tamara felt a surge of power. Not from anger but from defiance. From the deep, steadying realization that, for all their mockery, for all their power in this moment, they didn't know the first thing about her. She would show them. All of them. The rest of the day was a blur. Tamara went through the motions, her mind fixed on the confrontation in the hallway. The words she had spoken to them echoed in her head. You want to see who I am? Watch. She had meant every one of them. Yet, as she sat in class, the weight of what had happened pressed down on her, turning the air around her heavy and suffocating. At lunch, she took her usual seat in the back of the cafeteria, away from the crowds. The hum of voices filled the room, but no one looked at her. Not like they had in the hallway. The mocking glances, the cruel laughter, those had burned into her memory. She sat alone, pushing her food around her plate, her mind still caught in that moment of defiance. A quiet voice broke through her thoughts. It was Jasmine, her best friend. She slid into the seat across from Tamara, her eyes scanning her face. You good? Jasmine asked, the concern in her voice barely masking the tension that hung in the air. Tamara nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, just tired. Jasmine didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she watched Tamara closely, as if waiting for something more. Tamara appreciated the gesture, but it also made her feel exposed. Her mind was still reeling from the hallway, still trembling with the power of that single moment. But Jasmine, for all her care, couldn't understand. She couldn't possibly know what it felt like to be the target of their ridicule. I can't believe they said that to you, Jasmine murmured, shaking her head. That's messed up. And Mr. Carson? He didn't even do anything when you told him. Tamara's throat tightened at the mention of the history teacher. She had been forced to speak up to him earlier in the day after one of the students had cracked another racial joke during class. It wasn't the first time, and she knew it wouldn't be the last, but this time it felt different. She had finally raised her voice. She had demanded he do something. And what had he done? Nothing. He had offered her a weak apology, muttered something about understanding and giving everyone a chance, and then moved on. He hadn't even raised his voice. He hadn't done a thing. Yeah, Tamara muttered, shoving her fork into her lunch. They just don't care. No one does. Jasmine's brow furrowed, but she remained silent for a beat. What are you going to do about it? Tamara looked up at her best friend, meeting her eyes. What can I do? It's just the way it is. They're not going to change. Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden voice interrupted them. Well. If it isn't the I'm so oppressed girl herself. Tamara's blood ran cold as she turned her head to find Rachel Morgan standing with her group of friends, smirking down at her from across the cafeteria. Rachel's long platinum blonde hair bounced with every step as she approached. Her eyes narrowed and her mouth twisted into a sneer. You sure you're sitting in the right place? Rachel continued, loud enough for the whole cafeteria to hear. I mean, do you even know how to sit with the rest of us? Or are you too busy worrying about your heritage? The words felt like a slap to Tamara's face, and her heart lurched in her chest. The same gut-wrenching feeling crept in, the overwhelming sensation of not belonging. It wasn't just the words that stung, though. It was Rachel's tone, her air of superiority. It was the way she made Tamara feel like she was a charity case, an outsider who wasn't even allowed to exist in the same space. Tamara opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, constricted by an emotion she couldn't even name. Yeah, Rachel continued, laughing with her friends. I'm sure we all feel really bad for you. You're just so special. Jasmine stood up, her hands clenched into fists. Rachel, that's enough. Leave her alone. But Rachel just smiled smugly, enjoying the attention. What's she going to do about it? Cry. Go cry to the teacher again. Tamara's mind raced. Every second felt like an eternity as her gaze flickered around the cafeteria, searching for any support. But no one came. No one said a word. She felt invisible. Again. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She wasn't supposed to be the one who was always othered, always pushed to the side. Why did it always have to be her? Then something inside her clicked. She wasn't just going to sit there and take it. She wasn't just going to be silent anymore. Tamara stood up suddenly, her chair scraping across the floor. It was loud, sharp, cutting through the laughter and chatter of the cafeteria. She turned to Rachel, her eyes cold, her voice steady. You think you can just mock me and get away with it? You think you're so much better than me? You don't know a damn thing about me. The cafeteria fell silent. Rachel's face faltered, the smile slipping from her lips. She opened her mouth to respond, but Tamara held up a hand, stopping her. I've had enough, Tamara said, her voice low but clear. I'm done letting you walk all over me. And you know what? I'm not going to be the only one who knows what it feels like. So keep talking. Keep laughing. You'll see what happens. The room was silent. Tamara felt the heat of the gaze around her, but she didn't flinch. She didn't care anymore. She had had enough. Rachel glared at her, but instead of continuing, she turned and walked away, muttering something under her breath. The crowd parted, and for a moment Tamara stood alone, heart racing, hands shaking. But this time there was a sense of something else. Something more. Jasmine placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay? She whispered, her voice full of awe. Tamara nodded slowly, her eyes burning with quiet fire. I will be. Tamara didn't go home and cry like she expected to. She had thought the anger, the humiliation, would be too much to handle. She imagined herself breaking down in the privacy of her bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror as the tears blurred the image of the girl she no longer recognized. But something else had happened. Something unexpected. The words she had spoken in the cafeteria replayed in her mind, and they didn't sound weak. They didn't sound desperate. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had been heard. She had spoken, and the world hadn't swallowed her up. She had commanded attention. And it felt like the first step toward something bigger. At the dinner table, her mother asked about her day, as she always did. But Tamara was quiet. She didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to explain what had happened in front of the others. Instead, she sat back in her chair, running her fingers along the edge of her plate, her thoughts spinning. Her mom, sensing the shift in her daughter, didn't push. Tamara could see the concern in her eyes. But for once, Tamara wasn't sure how to explain it. How could she tell her mother that something had changed inside her? That she no longer felt helpless. That she was no longer content to be the quiet, invisible girl who let everything slide off her shoulders. Later that night, Tamara opened her laptop and stared at the blank screen. Her history project was due in 2 weeks, and while she had barely started, her mind kept circling back to one thing: the school's history. The stories she had never been told, the things that had been buried beneath the textbooks, and the polite smiles of teachers who never seemed to notice when things went wrong. She had always known something wasn't right, but the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just her imagination. The racism was built into the fabric of Jefferson High. The history she was learning wasn't just about dates and events. It was about power, about who had it and who didn't. Tamara felt the fire that had sparked earlier in the cafeteria start to grow. This wasn't just about surviving school anymore. This was about exposing the system, tearing it down from the inside out. It was about showing everyone that she would not be silenced again. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, her heart pounding as she typed. She started with the school's founding, the segregated policies of the past, and then moved into the more recent history. How the administration had systematically overlooked issues of racism. How the same teachers who gave speeches about equality had failed to act when it mattered. She wasn't just writing a history paper. She was uncovering a truth that could no longer be ignored. The next day in her history class she was different. The other students didn't notice it at first. They were too busy going about their usual routine, too busy pretending that nothing was wrong. But Tamara knew. She felt it in the way she held herself, in the way her voice steadied when she spoke, and in the way her eyes focused on Mr. Carson's face when he droned on about civil rights. When it was her turn to present her research, the class grew quiet. The usual murmurs died down. Mr. Carson, always so eager to get through the lesson, raised an eyebrow when Tamara stood. But this time she wasn't nervous. She wasn't shaking. She didn't even care if they laughed or mocked her. She was about to make them listen. She started with the truth. Jefferson High had been founded during a time of segregation. The school had been one of the last to integrate, and even now the system was far from perfect. The numbers told a story. Tamara outlined the disproportionate disciplinary actions against black students, the unspoken barriers to advancement, and the deeply ingrained biases within the faculty. She didn't give them statistics alone. She gave them real stories. Stories that had been swept under the rug for too long. She paused as she finished her presentation, the silence in the room thick and heavy. For a moment no one spoke. She looked around but no one met her eyes. Finally Rachel Morgan, sitting in the front row, scoffed. "So what? You think we're all just racists?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Tamara didn't flinch. "No. But I do think you're blind to what's happening around you. You're either too afraid to see it or too comfortable to care." Rachel's face flushed, and the class stirred uncomfortably, but Tamara stood her ground. She had said what she needed to say. And for the first time she didn't care if they liked her. Mr. Carson, however, did not seem pleased. He opened his mouth, probably to deflect or dismiss the tension, but Tamara was already packing up her things. "I'm done," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "And I'll be following up with a full report on the school's discriminatory history for the board. You can't pretend this doesn't exist anymore." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the classroom, her heart pounding but her steps steady. The hallway outside was empty, silent. She took a deep breath, the air cool against her skin, and smiled to herself. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward something bigger. And no one could silence her anymore. The days that followed felt surreal. Tamara couldn't escape the aftermath of her presentation. The whispers, the stares, the hushed conversations in the hallways. It was as if the entire school had shifted slightly, and no one was quite sure how to act around her anymore. But instead of retreating, Tamara found herself standing taller. Started with small things. Comment here and there. A flicker of understanding in the eyes of someone she passed in the hallway. But then it grew. More people were nodding to her in class. Even a few of the teachers began to look at her with a level of respect that hadn't been there before. And then there were the little moments of rebellion. Quiet moments but powerful in their own way. In algebra class, she noticed Mrs. Roberts had been quick to chastise Malik for talking during the lesson, but she hadn't said a word to Rachel and her group, who were laughing loudly just a few rows away. Tamara didn't hesitate. She raised her hand, her voice steady but filled with quiet authority. "Mrs. Roberts, don't you think it's unfair to punish Malik for speaking when Rachel and her friends have been talking the entire class?" The room went silent. Mrs. Roberts blinked at her, her mouth slightly open, as though taken aback by the audacity. Rachel's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say a word. Mrs. Roberts stammered. "I'll handle it, Tamara." "Thanks," Tamara said coolly, before turning back to her notebook. The class went on, but the air was different. The unspoken rules of who was allowed to speak up were changing, and Tamara had been the one to break them. That afternoon, during lunch, she caught sight of Jasmine again. Her best friend had been quiet lately, ever since the cafeteria incident. Tamara wasn't sure whether Jasmine was concerned about her, or if she felt uncomfortable with the new version of her best friend, the girl who was no longer content to be quiet and obedient. Jasmine approached cautiously, sitting beside Tamara, and the weight of her gaze was heavy. "I heard what you did in algebra," she said softly, not meeting Tamara's eyes. Tamara raised an eyebrow. "What, speaking up for Malik? You didn't think I'd let it slide?" Jasmine hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with her tray. I don't know. It's not like you to get involved. It's like, you've changed." Tamara couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her lips. "What? Because I'm not just letting people walk all over me anymore." "That's not what I mean," Jasmine replied, frustration creeping into her voice. "You're louder. It's like you're starting to pick fights, and I'm worried it's going to make everything worse." Tamara's expression softened, but there was a fire in her eyes that Jasmine hadn't seen before. "I'm not picking fights, Jasmine. I'm fighting back. And if people think that's a problem, then maybe they need to take a good long look at themselves." Jasmine fell silent, her gaze flickering nervously to the rest of the cafeteria. She looked around, seemingly unsure of how to respond. The silence between them stretched out, uncomfortable, until Jasmine finally spoke again. "I'm just scared for you, Tamara. What if it gets worse? What if they won't stop until I make them?" Tamara interrupted, her voice firm, a quiet intensity that she hadn't known she was capable of until now. She wasn't backing down anymore. She wasn't running away from this. The conversation ended there, but the seed had been planted. Jasmine's fear was genuine, but it wasn't the fear that Tamara needed to focus on. It was the fear of everyone else, the fear of confrontation, of being forced to look at the things they didn't want to see. After school, Tamara headed straight to the library, determined to dig deeper into the history of Jefferson High. She was going to find more. More evidence, more stories, more truth to expose. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone silence her. She knew the school administration would try to bury her findings, but she was prepared for that. She was more than prepared. As she skimmed through the school's old yearbooks, local newspapers, and archived records, Tamara discovered something chilling. There was a pattern of systemic racism woven into the fabric of the school. Black students had been punished more harshly than their white counterparts. Faculty members had made racially insensitive remarks that had gone unaddressed, and a long history of segregation persisted in the school's practices. But there was one piece of information that sent a chill down her spine. In one of the older yearbooks, she found a photo of the school's founding members. A group of men who were listed as key figures in the development of Jefferson High. Beneath the photo, there was a plaque commemorating their vision and leadership. A closer inspection revealed that some of the names were tied to controversial political movements of the past. People who had openly supported segregation and policies that perpetuated inequality. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Tamara's heart raced as she made notes in her journal, preparing to take her findings to the school board. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about exposing the entire system, about forcing Jefferson High to confront its ugly past. But the path ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew it. Every step she took toward truth would be met with resistance. People would fight her, silence her, try to discredit her. But she was done running. She had already stepped into the light, and there was no going back. The morning after Tamara had uncovered the chilling truth about Jefferson High's history, she could feel the weight of the information pressing against her, urging her to do something with it. The discovery had sent a surge of anger through her veins, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a truth-teller. She had the power to make them listen, to demand accountability for everything the school had hidden. But as the days wore on, the backlash began. Started with the looks. The sideways glances from teachers and students alike, some of them filled with suspicion, others with a silent warning. Tamara had seen it all before. This was the part where people tried to bury their heads in the sand, pretending nothing had changed, hoping she would just fade back into the background. Her classmates, those who hadn't joined in her cause, began to distance themselves. Her former friends kept their distance, and even Jasmine had become more withdrawn, though she still occasionally tried to reach out with soft words of concern. Tamara could see the fear in her best friend's eyes, the same fear she had once felt herself. the fear of making waves. Then came the confrontation with Principal Matthews. He had called her into his office after school one day. His face pinched in an expression that was a mixture of anger and something else, something Tamara couldn't quite place, but it made her skin crawl. "Tamara," he began, his voice cold, "I've received several complaints about your behavior recently. There's been a noticeable disruption in your classes, and frankly, your actions have caused quite a stir." He paused, steepling his fingers in front of him. "We value our students' freedom of expression, but there's a line. Do you understand that?" Tamara's stomach turned. She hadn't gone to the principal expecting praise, but she hadn't anticipated this either. He wasn't interested in what she had to say. He wasn't interested in the truth she had uncovered. He was trying to silence her. "I'm not causing a stir, Mr. Matthews," Tamara replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "I'm trying to get people to see the truth about this school, about its history." He shook his head slowly. "You think that's what this is about? No, Tamara. This is about creating division. You're putting ideas in people's heads that they don't need to be thinking about. Our job here is to educate, not to stir up unnecessary conflict." The words stung more than she expected. For a moment her mind went blank. Was she really causing division? Or was she just showing people the division that had always been there? "I'm not going to stop," Tamara said, her voice firm. "If I have to stand alone, I will. But this isn't just about me. It's about what's been hidden here for years." Matthews leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid you've misinterpreted things. You're crossing a line, Tamara. We're not asking for a protest. We're not asking for a media circus. I suggest you drop this before it escalates." Tamara's heart pounded in her chest. She was shaking now, but not from fear, from rage. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quietly, her words a challenge. "And I won't stop." For a moment they stared at each other. The silence between them felt suffocating, but Tamara didn't back down. Finally, Principal Matthews let out a frustrated sigh. "We'll see," he muttered, waving her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "But I'll be watching you closely." The tension that followed was palpable. Tamara felt the walls closing in, but she wasn't backing down. She had no intention of letting them intimidate her. Yet, despite her resolve, the pressure was starting to wear on her. The whispers in the hallways were growing louder. People who had once smiled at her now walked past without a word. Even the teachers who had seemed supportive before now turned away when she spoke. Then came the social media attack. One morning, she logged into her Instagram account to find dozens of comments on her most recent post, people accusing her of being ungrateful, troublemaking, playing the race card, and even just looking for attention. They called her a drama queen and a victim who was just looking to start a race war. It felt like her entire feed was flooded with negativity. She scrolled through the comments, her hands shaking, her stomach churning as she read each message. The words were venomous, filled with the kind of hate that seemed so casual, so insidious. It wasn't just the typical trolling. It was the kind of hate that came from people who didn't even see her as human anymore. One comment stood out more than the others. It was a screenshot of a post from Rachel Morgan, one of the girls who had mocked her in the cafeteria. In the post, Rachel had shared a picture of herself with a sarcastic caption, "Just finished my history project. Must be nice to get a scholarship for playing the victim card." The message was clear. Rachel was leading the charge against Tamara, painting her as someone who didn't deserve to be at Jefferson High, someone who was stirring up trouble for attention. Tamara closed her phone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was shaking now, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming realization that this fight was about so much more than she had anticipated. She had expected resistance, but this was different. People weren't just rejecting the truth. They were rejecting her. They were attacking her character, her very existence, because she dared to expose the lies they had built their lives upon. Jasmine called her that evening, but Tamara didn't pick up. She knew what she would say. She would tell her to stop, to protect herself, to let it go. But Tamara couldn't. She couldn't retreat. She wasn't backing down now. Not after everything she had uncovered. Not after everything she had fought for. The school system had tried to break her. It had tried to silence her. But Tamara wasn't going anywhere. And she wasn't alone. Tamara woke up the next morning with a heaviness in her chest that felt like a weight she couldn't shake. The night had been restless, full of twisting thoughts and scrolling through the endless, hateful comments on her social media. But this morning she wasn't just angry anymore. She was determined. The world around her felt like it was closing in, and she knew that she couldn't stand by quietly while everything around her crumbled. The school's administration had tried to silence her. Her peers had tried to bully her into submission. But none of it had worked. In fact, it had only made her more resolute. She had reached a breaking point. Tamara had been working on a new plan for the last few days. An idea that had been simmering in the back of her mind, and now it was ready to come to life. She couldn't take down the system from the inside alone. She needed to show the world and the school that it wasn't just her fighting for change. It was everyone who had been silenced, ignored, and oppressed. The thought was simple: a protest. Walkout. She had seen it happen before. Students across the country walking out to demand justice, to take a stand. Jefferson High wasn't immune to the fight for equality. The problem was, no one had ever tried to bring it to their doorstep. Tamara was about to change that. At lunch, she pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her bag, unfolding it with shaking hands. The plan was drafted. Every detail mapped out. It wasn't going to be just about one person or one moment. This was going to be a stand, a loud message to the entire school that racism could no longer be ignored. She was determined. She had a mission. And it didn't matter if they tried to crush her. She was done playing by their rules. It was time for action. The next day, she stood in the hallway, watching as the crowd of students bustled around her. Everything seemed normal. It was just another Monday morning, the usual chatter and laughter echoing off the lockers. But Tamara knew something was different today. Today, things were going to change. She could feel it in her bones. The plan was in motion. She had spoken to a few trusted friends, and they had agreed to help spread the word. Some of them were nervous, others were excited. The idea of walking out of class, risking suspension, was intimidating, but it was a chance to be heard. It was a chance to take back control of a space that had always tried to stifle them. Tamara's heart raced as the bell rang, signaling the start of the first class. She swallowed hard and walked into her history class, trying to shake off the anxiety that gnawed at her. She had no idea how many people would actually show up for the walkout, but it didn't matter. She had done her part. She had given them a chance to make a stand. Throughout the lesson, she could feel eyes on her. Some were curious, others hostile. Rachel Morgan and her friends sat near the back, whispering behind their hands, but Tamara didn't care. She didn't care about their glares, their threats. This time she was in control. The moment came at the end of class. Tamara stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. She felt the heat rise in her chest as she walked toward the door, her heart thudding loudly in her ears. Then she turned back to the class, her eyes sweeping across the room. The tension was palpable. Everyone was waiting for her to do something. "Everybody," Tamara called out, her voice ringing through the room. "We've got a choice today. We can keep pretending that everything is okay. Or we can stand up for what's right." There was a pause. A hush fell over the room. Rachel snickered under her breath, but the others were quiet, watching, waiting. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. It's about the history this school refuses to acknowledge, the injustices that have been ignored for too long. We need to make our voices heard." Without another word, Tamara pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway. And to her surprise, a few students followed her. And more. By the time she reached the main doors of the school, at least 50 students had joined her, some of them quiet, others murmuring to each other. Tamara's pulse quickened. This was happening. It was real. "Are we just going to walk out?" someone asked, their voice tentative. "Yes," Tamara said, turning to face them. We're walking out. We're showing them that we won't be silent anymore." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and they surged forward, a sea of students flooding out the door into the cold afternoon air. Tamara felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a protest. It was a revolution, small, quiet, but powerful. The group marched through the parking lot, and as they did, more students trickled out from the building, drawn by the sounds of the protest, the energy in the air. The school's official response was swift. Security guards appeared, urging the students to return to class, but Tamara stood tall, her head high, as she continued to lead the walkout. Some of the students hesitated, glancing nervously at the guards. They hadn't expected the resistance to be so direct. But Tamara wasn't afraid. "This is bigger than you," she told them, her voice calm but resolute. "This is about making them see us. This is about our history, our truth, and our rights. We won't be silenced." For the first time, she saw real hesitation in the eyes of the security guards. They had the power to send everyone back to class, but they knew deep down that they couldn't stop this. The protest wasn't huge yet, but it was spreading. And every step they took, every voice that joined the march, made it more powerful. By the time Tamara and the group reached the front steps of the school, they had attracted the attention of the local news. Reporters had shown up, their cameras flashing as they interviewed some of the students who had joined. Tamara could barely believe it. The story was spreading. The truth was starting to come out. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting alone. She had allies. She had a voice. And it was loud. The following days were a blur. What started as a small protest quickly gained momentum, spreading through the school like wildfire. Word of Jefferson High's walkout made the rounds on social media, on local news, and even reached the ears of parents and community leaders. Tamara had done it, she had made them listen. But as the wave of attention grew, so did the backlash. The first sign that things were escalating came the morning after the walkout. Tamara was summoned to the principal's office again. This time there was no vague lecture about creating division. Principal Matthews wasn't looking to negotiate. He was looking to make an example out of her. She entered his office, her heart pounding in her chest. Matthews sat behind his desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The atmosphere was colder than usual. She wasn't sure whether it was his anger or his disappointment that was more dangerous. "Sit down, Tamara," he said, his voice low. She complied, not bothering to make eye contact. The silence between them stretched for a long moment before he spoke again. "I've had to speak with several parents, teachers, and school board members after your stunt yesterday," Matthews began, his tone clipped. "You've caused a disruption, one that's not just going to go away with a few apologies. The media has latched onto this, and now we have an image problem." Tamara's heart raced. "I didn't do this for the media," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a sharpness in her words. "I did it because it's time for this school to face its problems." Matthews leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I don't think you understand what you've done. You've broken the rules, Tamara. You've stirred up something that's not easily undone. The administration is discussing how to handle this situation, and frankly, your actions are going to cost you." Tamara's stomach dropped, but she didn't let the fear show. "Cost me how?" "You're looking at suspension for your role in inciting this protest," Matthews said, his words cold and final. "If you think you can just walk out of class whenever you feel like it and not face consequences, you're sorely mistaken. You've put the entire school at risk." Tamara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. He couldn't silence her. "If you suspend me, it'll just prove you're trying to cover this up. You're trying to stop the truth from coming out," she said, her voice stronger now. "You think you can intimidate me, but you can't. I'm not backing down." Matthews stared at her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, his face hardening. "I think you'll change your tune once you've seen the consequences of your actions. You're a smart girl, Tamara. But you're about to learn just how far your voice can take you." The suspension came 2 days later. When Tamara walked into the principal's office to collect her things, the weight of the moment hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had known it was coming, but now that it was real, it felt worse than she had imagined. The school was punishing her for standing up, for exposing the cracks in the system, for speaking the truth. The silence as she walked down the hallway felt suffocating. No one spoke to her. No one met her eyes. The cold stares were a reminder of the price she was paying for doing what was right. As she passed by the classrooms, she saw students she once called friends, some of them with their heads down, others who pretended not to notice her. Only a few dared to give her an encouraging nod or whispered words of support. But those voices were drowned out by the others, the ones who called her a troublemaker, the ones who insisted she had ruined everything. The hardest part, though, was seeing Jasmine. Her best friend was standing by her locker, her face a mixture of concern and disappointment. She didn't know what to say, but Tamara could see it in her eyes. The fear of losing her, the fear of the world they had been forced to navigate so carefully. "You shouldn't have done it," Jasmine said quietly, her voice filled with regret. Tamara stopped in front of her, her heart aching, but she stood firm. "No. I shouldn't have stayed silent for so long." Jasmine shook her head, looking down at the floor. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Tamara. This is all getting out of control." "I'm already hurting," Tamara replied, her voice soft but unyielding. "I've been hurting for years, Jasmine. And so have so many others." Jasmine opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words faltered on her lips. She hugged Tamara tightly, not saying another word. It was a silent understanding, a moment that spoke louder than anything either of them could say. Back at home, Tamara sat at her desk, the weight of her suspension still heavy on her chest. Her phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, others angry or dismissive. But what caught her attention was a notification from the local news outlet. They had picked up her story. The headline read, "Jefferson High student suspended after leading walkout against racism." Tamara clicked on the link, her fingers trembling. The article was filled with quotes from students and teachers alike, many criticizing her actions, some offering their support. But the most chilling part was the quote from Principal Matthews, calling her actions irresponsible, and saying she wasn't a model student. Tamara clicked the comment section. There were a few sympathetic remarks, but they were drowned out by the majority. Comments calling her ungrateful, accusing her of playing the race card and seeking attention. She shut her phone off, leaning back in her chair. It wasn't just the suspension that hurt. It was the realization that no matter how loud her voice was, there would always be those who tried to silence it. She had stood up. She had fought back. But the fight was far from over. Tamara's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her mother. "I'm proud of you, Tamara. You're doing something that matters." Her mother's words struck her deeply, filling her with both sadness and hope. The consequences were real, but so were the stakes. This was only the beginning. The days after her suspension dragged on like a slow, suffocating crawl. Tamara stayed home mostly. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, both supportive and vitriolic, but she couldn't bring herself to look at most of them. Instead, she spent her time focused on the one thing that kept her grounded, her fight. The protest, the walkout, the truths she had uncovered about Jefferson High. It was all bigger than any punishment the school could impose on her. And that truth was her armor. One afternoon, a few days before she was set to return to school, she got a call from Jasmine. Tamara had been dreading this conversation. She didn't want to explain herself again, didn't want to defend her actions to someone who, deep down, still didn't fully understand. But Jasmine wasn't calling to argue. "Tamara, you need to turn on the news." Jasmine's voice was low, almost breathless with excitement. "The board's meeting tonight. It's about you." Tamara's stomach flipped, and she grabbed the remote without hesitation, flicking on the TV. Jasmine stayed on the phone, filling in the gaps as the local news anchor spoke. "Tonight, the Jefferson School Board will hold a public hearing to discuss recent events surrounding the protest led by senior Tamara Harris. The meeting, which will be open to the public, comes after a wave of controversy over the student-led walkout against racial inequality in Jefferson High's history. Tamara's suspension has sparked both support and backlash from students, parents, and educators alike. The anchor paused as a video clip played, showing Tamara from the protest, walking confidently out of the school, her fist raised in the air. The screen cut to a crowd of students marching with her. Tamara stared at the footage, stunned. It was surreal seeing herself on the news like that. She had never imagined anything like this would happen, not in a million years. "Do you think they'll actually listen?" Tamara asked, her voice quiet as the weight of it all sank in. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I think they have no choice. People are talking, Tamara. You're not alone in this anymore. They can't just ignore you. This isn't just about your suspension anymore. It's bigger than that." The thought of people finally listening made Tamara's heart race. She had spent so much time feeling like a voice in the void, like everything she said was drowned out by the walls of Jefferson High and the silence of those around her. But now people were paying attention. And for the first time, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt before: hope. The school board meeting was scheduled for that evening, and as the clock ticked closer to the start, Tamara felt her nerves return. She had faced 1,000 hostile glances, mocking comments, and official reprimands. But this was different. This wasn't just about her standing up to the school anymore. This was about every student who had ever been silenced, every teacher who had looked the other way, every parent who had been complicit in allowing these systems to fester. When Tamara arrived at the meeting, it was already packed. Dozens of students and parents were there, taking their seats and quietly murmuring amongst themselves. She could see familiar faces from the protest, her classmates, her friends, and even a few teachers who had supported her from the start. They had all shown up to stand with her, and for the first time, Tamara realized that she wasn't fighting alone. Principal Matthews was already seated at the front of the room, his stern expression fixed in place. He glanced up briefly when Tamara entered, but his eyes immediately dropped, as if he couldn't bear to meet hers. She couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. He knew what was coming. As the meeting began, the room fell silent. The board members sat at their table, each with their own prepared notes, some of them looking at the papers in front of them rather than meeting anyone's eyes. But Tamara noticed the tension in the air. It was clear they had no idea how to handle the fallout from the protest. The power was shifting. The first few speakers were parents, some in support of Tamara and others condemning her actions. The supporters spoke passionately about the need for change, the necessity of addressing the racism that had been allowed to fester in the school system. The dissenters called for Tamara to be punished further, saying her actions had disrupted the peace and created division. When it was Tamara's turn, her heart hammered in her chest, but she stood and made her way to the podium without hesitation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before she began. "I stand here tonight not just for myself, but for every student who has been made to feel invisible. For every student who has been called a name, overlooked, or dismissed because of their race." She began, her voice strong, echoing through the silent room. "The truth is, we've been living in a system that has failed us. Jefferson High's history is full of pain and discrimination, and I'm not the first student to feel the effects of that. But I won't be the last to speak up, and I refuse to let this school continue sweeping it under the rug." Tamara's gaze swept over the room, meeting the eyes of the students who had stood with her, the teachers who had supported her. She saw the board members shifting in their seats, discomfort creeping into their expressions. For too long we've been told to accept things as they are, to be quiet, to fit in. But that's not what this is about. This isn't about one protest, one suspension. This is about the systemic racism that runs deep in this school and in the world. And I'm asking all of you, no, I'm demanding that we acknowledge it, confront it, and make change. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She could hear a few murmurs of agreement from the crowd behind her, and she knew that this was a moment that couldn't be ignored. This was her fight, but it was also the fight of everyone who had been marginalized, overlooked, and silenced. When she finished speaking, there was a long silence. The board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the pressure she had placed on them. But they couldn't just dismiss her. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chairperson of the board cleared his throat. "Thank you, Tamara," he said, his voice strained. "Your words have been heard. And we will be reviewing the school's policies regarding racial inequality and discrimination." It wasn't the sweeping change she had hoped for, but it was a step. It was a start. The next day, the media buzzed with reports on the meeting. Articles were written, interviews were conducted, and Tamara's name was now synonymous with the fight for justice at Jefferson High. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She knew that. But she also knew this. The first real step toward change had been taken. And that, in itself, was a victory. Tamara looked out the window as the sun set, the golden light casting long shadows across her room. Her phone buzzed again, and she smiled as she saw the message from her mom. "I'm so proud of you, Tamara. You've made a difference." She didn't need anyone to tell her she had made a difference. She could feel it deep in her bones.